with your startup, risk builds over time. And one of our core tenets at Headway that we believe in reducing risk by running these behavioral experiments with the market and trying to figure out how do we take what customers said they would do and bring that forward and understand how we can build a business to support those people. What's going to get them to actually take action? So when you do that, you can learn quick and reduce risk. And it's always going to build. You're never going to eliminate all of the risks that you have in your startup or in your business. New factors are always going to enter in, different solutions for customers, different competitors in the market space. And one of the ways you can do that is by using different formats and different types of prototyping to try and take what your customers said, interpret that into some sort of solution or proposed solution that you can bring back and understand where this solution might live in their mind. What are the other things, like as you've taken all of the feedback and all of the insights you've gathered from your primary research and you get a solution in front of them, what are the things that come up that they say, oh, it does that thing, that's not super useful to me, but what about this, right? How do you start to discover and uncover some of those edge cases where you're really identifying unmet needs or things that are really cumbersome or take a lot of time, where you can start to elevate your solution and understand those edge cases. This is an adaptation of the build, measure, learn cycle in the lean startup. We use experiment because we're not always building products. We're creating interviews, question series, landing pages, prototypes. We might be creating proof of concepts or ultimately a full functioning MVP that delivers end to end. But we're always looping through this, and we're going and we're saying, what do we need to learn today? And what's the best way for us to learn that? Out of all the different feathers in our cap, all the different things in our tool belt, what are the best ways for us to go and learn that from the market? Is that just a line of questioning where we can go to customers and have a conversation? Is that creating a landing page like we talked about, where we're actually trying to bring them forward into an offer and into a future where we get them to act? Are we trying to go learn exactly what should make or what shouldn't be in our prototype? As we think about the first version of our product, where do customers put those things in their mind? And as we move forward into the next steps of behavior and that activation, proof of concepts, MVP, but we're always looping through this. We're always trying to reduce our risk. Prototypes are tools that help you communicate your idea, the value you can provide, and can help you learn. And that's so important because they help you tell a story and they give you some visuals to really explain your idea rather than you saying, having a big build up. You can get something in front of somebody, a proposed solution, a couple screen flows, an idea that you have that you can show them and really start to get feedback and build more understanding with people rather than just saying, what if it does this, right? And that's, as I mentioned, those edge cases will start to come out as they look at your product and say, oh, this is really cool, but what if it did this? Or, hey, does it solve for this edge case? Or I'm really struggling with that. It would be great if it did Y, right? And you start to go underneath a lot of the problems you saw before and get to these very specific, minute problems that you can really define. And that's going to elevate you and really show your understanding for the target market and for the customers you're serving better than a competitor. Prototypes help you tell that story and use something tangible to build understanding with the customers you're looking to serve. And that's because in any conversation, there's always really 4 conversations that happen. There's what you said, there's what you thought you said, there's what they heard, and what they thought they heard. And so using something tangible, using something that really aligns your understanding together will help to bridge that gap where you're talking about the same thing, you're talking about solving it the same way, you're starting to bring it from how might we solve this to what are all the details surrounding this that are going to help us create the best solution. And you can learn best with prototypes, just like you can with research. Instead of looking at market trends and looking at secondary research, you go and talk to the actual people you're looking to serve. Prototypes can help you by getting those same prototypes in front of the users you talked to before. So in a lot of cases, that's going back to customers you talk to and potential customers and prospects you talked to early on to really dig into the problem and kind of come into this world where you're doing more of a solution interview. And you might do a little bit of a problem and solution interview where you're getting this in front of users. When you're prototyping, there's kind of three ways to think about it. And there's definitely edge cases in between, and there's different mixes and matches of these. But sketches and wireframes, these are things that you can get out very quickly. These are things that you can sketch on a piece of paper and try to bring this idea, this vision that you have into something real, something tangible that you can get in front of people and have a conversation around. The next type is clickable prototypes. These are most often the high fidelity things you see on landing pages, and they're things that you can use to communicate not just a single idea, but a workflow and how things might work together. The next one is no and low code. So these are things like even connecting Zapier with Google Sheets and a way to kind of concierge your value to your customer. These are things like Adalo, even low code tools that help you design in browser, but then export to code and really prototype really quickly. So we believe in continuously validating the products by answering a series of questions, and prototypes come in different phases. When you're trying to answer those questions, these are tools that you can use to try and give you what you need to move your startup forward and to really reduce that risk that we talked about. So here, as we look at it, sketches and wireframes early on, they'll help you, define your target segment. They'll help you understand if people have a specific problem. As you're having conversations with them, you're going to be able to get this in front of them and get a good feel for how they're going to respond to it. Prototypes can also help you do that, but maybe too high fidelity for people to give you true feedback. So you might want to focus on problem discovery type questions rather than solution questions early on when you're trying to figure out, am I talking to the right person? Do they have this problem? That's why most often you're going to want to do some sort of joint interview where you're digging into the problem, you're building some context for their specific experience, and then you're introducing the solution versus just a solution. So that's something to keep in mind. And you see here, when you're using prototypes, these clickable prototypes, they can help you understand demand to a certain point. You can use a prototype, and we have many times where we're not driving someone from a website, but we're doing it in person. We're walking them through a prototype. We're trying to get them to buy on the spot. And so if you're doing like a demo, you're selling B2B or B2C, you're trying to get commitment on just a prototype and not just something that's functioning. You can see also here, there's this overlap between no code and low code. So tools like Webflow, Bubble, things that help you build your website can also help you deliver that value and understand, hey, will this person give me the right information? Will they fill out their profile? Will they come back? All of those things you can start to build, but there's a limit in prototyping on what you can do. No code and low code tools will help you really extend the life of your prototyping. So if you start with a tool like Bubble or Adalo, you can actually fully deliver the value to your customer. So if you start with those, keep that in mind that you won't have to change context, you won't have to change platforms, and you'll be able to continue delivering value and building upon that as you're learning with the market.
We have a few kind of topics teed up here. Ryan, if you want to share that, we can start chatting through. I think the big thing is, knowing when to turn for them. A prototype is a tool that you can use at many different phases of your company. Like when you're first trying to figure out if there's anything here, when you're trying to create clarity, as we talked about in the video, and even when you have a mature product that's kind of moving on, and something that you're trying to learn about new features. You could even consider some of the prototypes that you create to be, a lot of things we talk about when products are in the wild and we're trying to grow them with new features or new functionality or things like that. We often will create fake doors and like prototypes inside of a product, things that fake the value that help us to learn whether or not people are going to act on something, right? It might not be fully functional, but it could be even just these little doors inside of your product that ask, hey, what might you expect to see here, right? These real-time kind of feedbacks and nudges and things like that. So before we get into that, I think it'd be great to turn to some questions here. Looks like we have one from Hank. And the question is, what type of prototyping do you guys specialize in? Web, software, hardware? We prototype and really specialize in web and software. So as we think about the different software that we do, like a lot of what we do is web applications. So learning on the web, cloud-based solutions, that sort of thing, in addition to device specific software. So iOS, Android apps, devices and things like that. We do bridge the gap into prototyping and learning with software and hardware, but we don't do any hardware development. So we work with some teams on some IoT devices and things like that, where we're doing the software side, but we're kind of learning alongside their team and their researchers and things from a hardware perspective. And the specific example I'm talking about is in the healthcare space, and it's a CGM, or a continuous glucose monitor, where we're helping bridge the gap from the hardware to the software experience that someone has and the data they get to it.
Awesome. We got this other question from Sanjay on LinkedIn. With these no-code tools, there's always a steep learning curve. I definitely agree with that as a marketer that's trying to learn no-code. Would you suggest non-tech founders learn them or freelance then MVP and prototype?
Yeah, if you could clarify, Sanjay, what you mean kind of at the end there. I would say, the best interface is no interface. I don't know who said that. It's from a design book, but essentially, like, you can prototype a lot. And as we were preparing for this and kind of gearing up for this session, I was thinking of one prototype I saw that was just pencil and paper, that was an actual workflow that had some interactive elements. And it was actually a father prototyping an idea for a kid's learning tool. Right. And they would kind of ask about the experience, say like, hey, if you wanted to change colors, like, where would you do that? Right. They're kind of guiding them. This was more about usability and less about like whether the kid wanted it. But it's a very good example of how you can use even just a paper prototype, and you can move the things and introduce a new sheet of paper when they click on something, and you kind of ask them to use the pencil to navigate. And those types of things you can learn from, just paper prototypes, which don't have any learning curve. I think when you get into more advanced high fidelity prototypes, I guess the learning curve has gone down a little bit. When you look at Figma, I would always look at, like, are there any UI kits out there, things that I can replace that make it look real, but maybe aren't your initial design? Like, I don't think you have to focus on creating anything from scratch, but using tools out there. Like at Headway, we have a tool or a UI kit called Shipwright that you can essentially grab all the building blocks and put them together. You would just hold command and point at the text you want to change. And, there are few, I guess, new things under the sun when it comes to interface design. And so a lot of that is about, what do the words say? How are they, how are those things positioned? What are you prioritizing from a hierarchy standpoint? So the learning curve can go down there. There's also other tools that introduce constraints, like Glide, which is, they don't really allow you to modify the interface at all, but they allow you to build a prototype and connect the Google Sheet backend to it. So Glide Apps is one where, like, all of their whole UI is built off a database that's in Google Sheets, and you put the token in there, and very easy and straightforward to follow. So I would say, it's going to depend on what you're trying to learn. If you're trying to build a prototype as a blueprint for design and dev to actually build a product, the curve, I think, will continue to be a little bit larger. But if you're looking to get feedback from your customers, I think the best tool is the one you know how to use. And so just figuring out what that right balance is.
Yeah, so we had a couple, discussion topics teed up to talk about rapid prototyping. And I'm going to do is, if anybody has any additional questions, please keep them coming, and we'll pause to answer those, because those are really open office hours as far as for Q&A. But some things we might want to touch on, Andrew. This is your wheelhouse, essentially. I might prompt you with some questions, Andrew, on, hey, why rapid prototyping? I heard in the video you talked about communication. Can you talk about why communication and conversation starters, and why rapid prototyping is helpful in that aspect?
Yeah, I think, there's a few layers here. There's one with your customers. I think, like, as you're trying to bring a brand new product to market, you can get certain insights from those conversations, but it's always like the way that your idea materializes. Like, if you were to wait and you didn't prototype at all, and you went in, built the thing, you said, hey, the customer liked it, they liked the idea of it, and then you show it to them, and then you get all these deeper questions around, like, well, how would I actually use that? And, like, where do I integrate my data? And you start to get all these things that you never thought about if you weren't able to bring something to a customer and really get them in the mindset of, hey, this is trying to solve you, right? I think you talk about it a lot, Ryan. It's like this imagined use case where, like, you bring them from this world of, yeah, that sounds great too. Okay, well now that I'm seeing it, like I'm thinking about all these other things that I have to do with the data before it gets in here. Like, how does that work? Right, and start to uncover these actual constraints. So one of them is making sure that you create a point of clarity with your customers. The other one that prototyping is really useful is using it with your teams, right? Like design to development handshakes. Like when you're thinking about iterating on product inside your team, and you're bringing a brand new functionality, feature, animation flow, something to life, like giving your development team something to work off of as a blueprint and as an example of kind of the desired outcome is important. And you can level that all the way up. Like with the tools that we have today, I mean, you can do all of those animations, in some design tools that you can hand off and dev can do it. You can even export React. You can do a lot of those things from it, but without kind of that initial creation, you have this ping pong that happens between design and dev and product around like, what is the actual end desired experience that we're trying to deliver for this customer. And those sorts of things that change and can change as your vision changes are really important to say, like, yes, this is the feature we're going to develop in this roadmap. And that also goes into another thing that we talk about a lot, is just like prioritization. Like, what level of fidelity does this version 1 of this feature need to be, that you can have a conversation and say, hey, we're going to peel this back with design and dev, and we're going to say, hey, this is actually, if we think about this feature, actually 3 releases, the must-haves for these are, we don't need anything fancy. Like, if this isn't going to sell itself, this is something that's inside of an existing product. But the next phase might be leveling up that experience. And the last phase would be like adding those touches of delight on top of it. So I think using prototypes help you create that common understanding of what's now versus what's later, and what is that desired experience that we're going to own all the way through to the customer.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. You talked about on the customer side, like a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Because you can conceptualize, you can kind of explain it. Oh, it could do this, but then when you actually see it, I think we really see like clients light up when they see the designs come in. Like, oh my gosh, this is so much better than I imagined. But then the questions start happening. How does this work? How would this work? And then what would happen before and after? So it begins. It gets the conversation started in such a great way, and it also does help the team align and converge on what are we actually building. The developers can start asking questions on how would we do this and where does the data come from, right? And like it brings everyone together. I think design is like really, really centric to building and creating products. The other thing you mentioned on prioritization is the capital efficiency thing, right? Because you might realize that we think this feature is needed, but then when we actually get into it, maybe that isn't a must-have. And like that design we can wrap a prototype really, really quick. Whereas to actually build that out, it could take weeks to months to build some of these amazing features that we're coming up with. But we might be able to find a faster way to get them there, right? So prototyping to get customers to their destinations quicker is capital efficient. We learn quickly, and the consequences of all this is if we don't prototype, then what, Andrew?
Well, I mean, you're going to see all these things. You're going to build things that nobody wants, right? You're not going to get that level under like that initial impression of the idea from customers, and you're going to get a lot of this ping pong effect that you see like when you don't prototype or you don't provide examples. And some of that can be mitigated through design systems, which is another thing that we really harp on with our clients, is like getting your tooling leveled up that allow you to prototype fast, that tear down the walls, right? And so I think when you don't have this mindset of continuously going back to customers, you see this like expectation and delivery gap, or this expectation and experience gap that happens with your customers, where you're starting to trust your internal team more than the people you're serving. And you're thinking about all the best practices and the shiny new trends, and you're just kind of like designing static screens and sending them over the wall to development and not including the customer. I think that's the biggest risk. Like, draining resources you don't have, right? Like no one has unlimited runway. Even the biggest companies in the world like have limited runway for certain projects. So like learning is really important. Making sure that you're learning without spending too much resources. Like very high, in my mind, like rapid prototyping is one of the highest ROI activities that you could do with your customers, that you could also do with your team. And it's going to serve everybody that's that's involved. So if you don't do that, like, you're really missing the clarity it brings to everybody.
Yeah, fantastic. We've done a question coming in, Jacob.
Yeah, looks like it. There we go. Hank asks, how could you guys help with a hardware-based startup? So sensors, medical devices, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the example that I gave, we help them with the peering and onboarding experience, because as you get the hardware, obviously, like, there's in most cases is a software that sensor connects to. And so the one that we're working on now is exactly that. Essentially where we're bridging the gap between, we're kind of bringing some of the rapid prototyping, some of the research tools, some of the like human factors studies and approaches into kind of that hardware world where we're learning, like, what does that initial experience look like? And how do you test that? And how do you iterate over that? Because ultimately you have to bridge the gap between the hardware and whatever software they're integrating with. That could be on the hardware itself, if it has a screen, or that could be, your phone, it could be an Apple Watch, it could be something else that interfaces. And the biggest thing there is we're trying to figure out like what messaging is going to resonate or create the most clarity for the next step, or continue them on their journey and help them ultimately win. And when you think about the medical world, like so many things are mission critical. Like, it is life or death for you to convey the right thing. So part of that is like understanding from the professionals and the medical side, like, what is the most important data to change someone's behavior that they need to know now. And then how do we combine that with like this easy to use experience that gets the clutter out of the way. But then also, like, you kind of have two layers when you think about medical, or at least in our approach, where you have like, what are the things I need to know right now? And then under the surface, what are all the diagnostic type details of visualizations, the things that tell me a story that's more than just immediate in real time. So I think like helping to design that interface, helping to develop those integrations front end, back end with whatever server and algorithm that we usually integrate with on a sensor.
Yeah, and I think rapid prototyping becomes even more critical actually when you're combining software with hardware, right? Because hardware, you're starting with these literally larger prototypes, right? The larger physical things that you're flashing manually, and what your goal is to get into production is to shrink that form factor down to something really, really small, right? And to be able to do that, you also have to know, you got to lock your requirements in, because you're going to ship it off to some OEM manufacturer, and the minimum order volume on this hardware stuff, and we've seen this, it's like, it's a significant investment. And really, with hardware, you're only getting one shot at that. And so the user experience component with that becomes really, really critical. And we see that in the medical stuff that we've been doing, is that you have a lot of different error states, right? Is the problem the battery's not charged correctly? Is it too low that therefore we're getting like inaccurate data because the battery's too low? Are we getting like it's not mounted correctly? How is the sensor actually functioning? How do you calibrate it? Right? Is it calibrated at the manufacturer? Does the software do that? Does the visualization of the data does that get aggregated inside the hardware itself? Does that get aggregated in the software itself? Well, the depends on how it would be visualized, and what would the user experience need to be like, and how do you onboard someone really smoothly, and so like I would say that the software world is your customer's world into the hardware, but it's more complex because the software and hardware need to communicate, need to be synced, and all those different sharing states. There's a lot of them, and it becomes very complex. So prototyping your software and hardware together and getting those in a similar cadence so that you can continuously iterate. And actually, we talk about being able to, how do we rapid prototype the hardware and rapid prototype the software? And when you have these interdependent things, how do you actually create isolation so that each team can rapid prototype on their own without being lockstep, having to reflash every single every couple hours. So there's lots to think about, even the infrastructure to enable rapid prototyping for your team in these environments. But it is really, really, really critical to do in not only software, but even more so with software combined with hardware.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryan. And one of the next question here from Hank is, do you guys FDA or 510K experience? Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Kind of like, bridging the gap between prototyping to cutting a release that is then getting sent through clinical trials, sent through human factor studies. But then, like, how do you continue to iterate as you're waiting for that feedback? What's the common path? And I think rapid prototyping helps us not only just like prototypes, clickable prototypes, but even like these proof of concepts where you go into the world where you're making sure you're mapping all of these error states from the hardware into software and communicating that back so that the person knows exactly what to do next. I think part of that is that that quality management that FDA and 510K do. So we have experience, a handful of projects that we've been a part of in that, not necessarily writing the full documentation, but being a part of the software, the architecture, the interdependencies that kind of talk and the process for how the data flows and ultimately makes it back to the user. Because the goal there obviously is to become a replacement for a physician or a nurse or someone that's practicing to tell them the right things at the right time. So definitely part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the last thing, I know we're not talking specifically about medical hardware, but this question did come up that, the usability testing then becomes important for FDA certification as well. So like there's minimum thresholds on usability. And because these things there are so many different states these things can be in, that making sure that flow completely makes sense to the user is really important. And it is one of the FDA thresholds for certification. So it's stuff that's really important and part of rapid prototyping. I think there are a lot of different times we would do prototyping, right, Andrew? See, I think one of those is like, it really depends, and Andrew mentioned this, the kind of prototyping you're going to be doing really depends on what you want to learn, right? And so an example of that is like, if you're trying to learn about the context of a customer, even like whether you're developing a new feature or a new product, this comes into play. Like, you really want to make sure you understand. Andrew talks about being able to go back into the market, not staying just in our heads on our teams, and interacting closely with those customers. And, but really also means that we have to understand their workflow. We have to understand, and especially in a B2B world where you're in so many different systems, what is the workflow they're going through? So a prototype might actually be, Andrew, right? A prototype might actually be a workflow to go back to the customer with just to plot out. So let me understand this correctly, right? Like, first you do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And we see this like a lot of times when companies are trying to, either reimagine software they already have or create something totally new. There's nothing new under the sun, as Andrew's kind of talking about. And so there are existing alternatives. They are accomplishing these jobs to be done in some way today. And for us to make improvements on that, we really have to understand how it's being done now. So I'm kind of talking about, hey, one way to prototype, a lot of times we think about it's UX and screens, but there's a lot of other questions you might want to learn about. And one of those might be like, what's the actual workflow, right? What data elements do you really need? What do you look for to make these types of decisions? Andrew, anything on that?
Yeah, I think from a workflow perspective, is that what you mean?
Yeah, or
like when
workflow, when to prototype.
Yeah, when we're thinking about like, going from this world where we have this marketing page or this landing page where you're trying to, in most cases, if you're a software solution or SaaS product, you're trying to convey the type of value they'll receive through what we're calling hero screens or something. But that's just one part of the story. And you can amp that up and like understand how you connect more with that market when you're not there, those unmoderated kind of tests, by doing like GIFs or, animations of what that flow looks like. You could, level that up even more by doing a video and things like that. But ultimately, what you're trying to learn will dictate like how much you're going to prototype and what's enough, right? If you're just doing a one-page report for somebody and you kind of precede it with, hey, we're going to get your data from, your QMS system, let's say, and we're going to kick out this report for your 510K certification. It's a one-page report. Like, you're showing them the end result of that. right? You might not have to do much prototyping, but you might say like, hey, here's a screen where you drop your data file, we'll come back and show it there. But if you're thinking about selling somebody on a journey with software, this is where rapid prototyping, I think, really can be a good crystal ball for your company. When you can show them a demo of something that looks real, even though it's not functioning, like you can start to sell on prototypes that capture the value, that captures the context, that then convinces them that like you're the person that's going to solve this problem for them. And all the other things that they've tried haven't worked, but the flow and journey you take them through shows them that, one, you really understand their problem, and two, you're going to solve it in an intuitive way, and they can start to imagine themselves using it through that prototype. That goes beyond just those static screens. Yeah, I don't really have too much else on here. We could talk about kind of the same things all day, but I think like if you're working on a product, you should always be prototyping new things with new customers, new things with existing customers, things inside of your team. I don't think rapid prototyping ever goes away and ever like decreases in value. I think like as you implement things that make your team more aligned and efficient, like design systems, like the documentation that comes with those, rapid prototypes still have a place, but you're just producing probably less of them that aren't, as well defined inside of those systems.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, and the point we're trying to get here is that there's many different types of rapid prototypes, right? And it all depends on what you're trying to learn. If you're trying to sell a new feature set or a new upsell or a new premium package or a new product, you might want to prototype on the demand side and just some hero screens, not even a flow, just a couple of hero screens that kind of like, man, it'd be amazing if I had that one screen, right? The end of the rainbow, if you will. Or if we're looking at, full journeys, experiences, animations, we're testing for usability, testing for, is this the full experience, or what do you need to make these decisions, right? A lot of different things, but it really comes back to, hey, what are we trying to learn at this moment in time? And the rapid prototypes kind of change and adapt based on that. And so some examples, are UX designs, which you're kind of talking a lot about. It's kind of like what comes front of mind when we talk about rapid prototypes. But it can also be, as we're kind of mentioning, it can be workflows and journeys. Like if I'm mocking that up, yeah, that is. Oh no, you're missing a step. I actually need to do this first. That's pretty important to know, right? In the flow. We talked about it could be marketing materials. In some cases, it can also be spreadsheets, right? Like sometimes we're doing like intense calculations on certain things. Prototyping can be a lot of different things. So I know we gravitate towards UX designs, which is a lot of it. But I also want to expand our thinking into like, there's a lot of different kind of prototypes, spreadsheets. I know I was doing like healthcare calculations for a lot of different, insurance premium kind of stuff and reimbursements, and how does all that stuff work? We have to know how that stuff works. Not only is the software usable, but how are we going to actually bring the right results in at the right time? Anything on this stuff, Andrew?
No, I think that's all. Yeah, it's all super helpful. It's like the prototype is a thing that you can use to learn and create clarity. Like ultimately, So choosing the right format based on what you're trying to learn is really key.
Cool. And if we zoom in just to the UX prototypes, I think there is a lot of questions around. People would ask, hey, Andrew, do I make lo-fi? Do I do hi-fi? Do I have to do clickables? Do I start in there on the design side, or I just go right into functional? Like, can you talk about the different types of prototypes and maybe what would you reach for in what situations?
Yeah, I think fidelity is really good when you're trying to go from a vague problem to a more concise, clearer problem. You're just trying to learn really quick and say like, hey, am I getting this right? You're trying to get something in front of somebody you're trying to serve and say, hey, like I was thinking about this idea and like, I thought it might look like this, right? And here's how it might function. You're talking a lot about hypothetical because you haven't really made any decisions yet. And you can draw new things in that meeting with them. Oh, so you're telling me that this is part of that, right? And these flows, those are very low fidelity things that would be sketches, would be things that you can use with like Pop which is a tool, prototyping on paper. I think Marvel app acquired them. But like, there's a lot of different tools out there that you can use. And Pop actually allows you to basically just draw on a piece of paper, and you can take a photo of it, and it allows you to create hotspots on those sketch images, those photos, that you can connect to one another. So you can actually create these imagined flows. They look just like sketches, you know, and be able to chain something together really easily. As we think about like clickables, I think there's a few. I mentioned like using Figma, using, you know, Marvel app is another prototyping tool. InVision, if you're using Sketch, and some other things that they did have some prototyping tools. I don't know where those left off at. Balsamiq, which is, those kind of look like sketches in themselves. They have themes that look just like sketches that are lower fidelity, and really help you ask a question about a flow and not get feedback from people on like, oh, this doesn't look as good as the other software on the market, right? You're focusing more on the flow and the type of problem you're solving, and whether or not the data you're ultimately going to give them is going to be solved through that. As you think about, you know, more higher fidelity clickables, Taryn from our team mentioned ProtoPie. There's Figma, which they have tons of smart animations. You really start to level those up. There's also things like Framer. There's no shortage of amazing, really high fidelity tools that don't involve development, that you can go and learn and make it as real as possible, and get it in front of somebody and that sort of thing. As you think about like functional prototypes, I think learning through, I think part of this is like figuring out, can you solve it a different way? We turn to Bubble a lot when we think about like these early prototypes, or Adalo, which is a mobile building tool, things where we're not sure we're going to go and build a high scalable product for, that really help us to still learn and get feedback from customers. I think the key there is it's real enough that you can serve a customer, you can charge them, but it's also easy enough for you to change it where you're not going to be going into multi-month cycles to pivot or iterate your value prop, you know, as you think about learning. And those things, you know, those tools like Figma, like Bubble, Webflow is even a tool that people use for memberships with like MemberSpace. There's a ton of different tools that you can turn to that help make your idea just an idea, or take it from just an idea to an actual business where you could charge, you could integrate Stripe, you can actually accept payment and not be this huge gap. I mean, you kind of go into proof of concepts and really functioning MVPs at that point. There are quick ways out there that, you know, if you get creative and really resourceful and you look at Bubble's templates, there might be something in a tangential space that's out there that you can just put your logo on and it's functioning, and you can go bring that to the market and learn. But the I guess caution I would urge there is, it's so real that if you're completely wrong, it's hard for you to detach yourself as a creator from the thing that you created. And there was a podcast I was actually listening to this morning from Snowflake CEO Frank. I don't remember his last name, but he was saying, like, you know, the thing that he's learned, and I would say this is true, like, if you're totally in the wrong ballpark and you're not even on the target, you can't iterate your way to success. So if you're completely in the dark on it and you don't know, customer's not resonating, you don't have the problem well defined, like, incremental changes aren't going to get you there. But if you're on the target, you can start to make adjustments. And I think that's very true about like starting lower fidelity, starting with conversations, starting with things where it's easier for you to change your mind. Because I think as humans, we get really tied to it, versus these higher fidelity things where it's like, I made this, right? And there's a level of pride and a level of like confidence you have around something that looks great, but all of the things that prop that up are harder to change and harder to switch out, versus you focusing, you know, on lower fidelity things early on and getting clarity.
I think that's so good. What you just said right there is so right on, because, you know, it's real tempting for us to get stuck in our idea and our concept, and we want to make it ours. And there's part of this ego in there, right? Like, we want to go right to high fidelity, but we do go super narrow when we do that, right? I think you're saying, hey, when we prototype, let's resist the urge to go right into this one idea and make it super hi-fi. Let's stay a little bit further back and say, hey, are we understanding the problem the right way? And kind of there's, you know, maybe generate 10 different directions we could go, right? Which ones of these is directionally is more correct? You know, it's almost like creating these different, in the marketing world, I've heard it say, growth hacking, I've heard it say, you know, the first thing we got to do is figure out what forest we're going to head towards. You know, so actually generating prototypes that are very different from each other, to explore that opportunity space, and then find out what resonates, and then get more narrow and get higher fidelity as you go more narrow. I think that is a really great way to explain it, Andrew.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. You don't want to miss the forest through the trees and realize you're in the wrong forest.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to do a hi-fi leaf and figure out that not only are you on the wrong tree, but maybe you're in the wrong forest, right?
Right.
So, do we want to step through any tools? I know you talked to them, but or unless there's any other questions, which I don't see coming in at this point. Should we pull up tools? I know you had a couple of them.
Yeah, we can chat through a few of them real quick here. I know Jacob linked to the talk that this is from. Let me pull this open here. Yeah, so we talked about sketches and wireframes, like the benefit. Anybody can draw, right? Well, I don't want to say anybody, but most people can draw. You know, you have a pencil or pen or something. Your iPad you could even use. You can leverage these, Pop, which is marvelapp.com/pop, for sketched mobile prototypes where you can link them together. You can upload photos of web-based app sketches and connect them in Figma or Whimsical or InVision. And, you know, Whimsical, we didn't really talk about a lot here. They have some tools for wireframing that are kind of like baked in. Think of it almost as like a stripped down Balsamic, where you actually don't get the benefit of clickable prototypes, but it helps you to create a screen. And like we've used these many cases with our clients when we're doing like crazy eights, and going into like quadrants, or maybe even going to single things where it strips out all the UI bits and just, we can build like a easy way to start mocking up some ideas and how we might do things. And here are just some examples of the prototyping apps. Figma is obviously, this is a high fidelity example, but kind of in this sketch wireframe vein would be more about uploading images from your phone or scanning them in, if you have a scanner in this day and age, and linking those hotspots together. Here's an example of Whimsical's tool that really helps you to create these prototypes that look real, that are wireframes, but they really strip down the amount of features and give you some tools out of the box. When we talk about like hiring a high fidelity prototype, there's free tools that you can use. All of these have some version of free plan that you can start doing. And we think about high fidelity prototypes, talk about like this could be a website or a landing page, it could be an app. Be resourceful, like find UI kit, especially when you're starting out a brand new idea. Maybe you're not at a company and you're starting your own thing. Finding things that are out there and adapt them. Like you don't have to create anything brand new. No one is going to know that you didn't create it from scratch. I think even like designers, developers, creators like have this thing of like, hey, if I'm going to build a business, like I have to do everything from the ground up. I have to design everything from scratch. I can't use anything that's out there. And I would kind of argue like if your goal is to build a business and not do a hobby, like something that you want to do just because you want to do it or you want to use it, like you should find things out there that are going to increase the time to learning. There are some learning and barrier curves here when you think about Figma and Webflow and Bubble, but actually all three of these have really great communities and really great courses that are out there for cheap that you can get from people in the community, or their academies are really good. So they've done a really great job of building community and helping you learn. I mentioned the community here. I mentioned this before, but Headway has Shipwright UI kit that we use as starter kits for some of our projects and apps and websites and things like that. These are just showing you there's many different types of apps and things that you can build on Bubble, and templates that you can buy, free, paid, that sort of thing. And a lot of great Build Camp is a really great academy for Bubble as well. And then using no-code tools, we talked about this, like testing perception, testing user-generated content and profiles. Like, will people give us things? And part of what we mentioned in the video, we didn't talk too much about here, is like, what are we trying to learn? Like what phase of learning are we at about our customers, and how might we go about learning it? And some of these we can test onboarding, we can start to measure behavior and build these engagement funnels. Bravo is an app that syncs with Figma. So if you're a designer, you can design it in Figma, import that into Bravo, connect it with a Google Sheet, and you can start to serve up data. You can actually point Bravo at different APIs as well to populate the data. Glide is one that's very user-friendly, and you don't have to design or code. In fact, they have like these templates that you can grab, and very common app templates that you can start to test, whether your data is valuable. If your differentiator is experience, Glide isn't going to help you. Bravo may not help you, right? If you're trying to differentiate on like that experience that you give a customer and it's not inherently different, you might want to go a custom route. But that I think is more rare than you might think. That's kind of it from that perspective, from tools. But there are also other tools we didn't mention, like Airtable. There are other tools out there to that you can prototype and learn from.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Ryan, for that awesome discussion today. I think hopefully it seems like everybody got value out of it just based on the chat. Some great questions today. But yeah, so if you're listening to this and you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on LinkedIn, be sure to follow the Headway company page, and we'll be able to keep sharing content like this, more updates on future events like this. So we have a lot of great stuff in store for this year. We're super excited to focus on helping people just like you. So I don't have anything else to share. Otherwise, I did put a couple links in the comments to like all the tools that Andrew was sharing. This article has all those. And then just a link to our resources page, because we have things like the Shipwright UI kit. There's more videos like the one we shared at the beginning of this live stream from Startup Foundations. We have Founders Mindset, was getting your head in the right space when it comes to making better decisions, founder market fit, right? Building a team, all that stuff. Like, how do you kind of like remove yourself from like making decisions so you're being more objective, and to actually build a business and not just a product you think is going to work. So lots of great stuff in there. I don't have anything else to share. I don't know if Ryan or Andrew, if you have anything you want to share with the audience before we end the live stream.
I don't have anything. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody again for coming and tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you have other questions, feel free to email us, ahoy@headway.io, or connect with us on social, and love to help point you in the right direction or give you any thoughts that would be valuable in your journey. So thanks everybody.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Take care and have a great day.